Today on Professor Tom's 10-Minute Philosophy, Skeptical Arguments. The world of your experience may not be quite what you think it is. It may in fact be an illusion. It is certainly at least sometimes distorted. This is a very old idea. As the great philosopher and musician Freddie Mercury once sang, "Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?" "We are such stuff as dreams are made on," wrote Shakespeare a few hundred years earlier in The Tempest. The rift between what we think is real and what is really real was in fact one of Shakespeare's favorite themes. As he wrote in the wonderful comedy As You Like It, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." Over the centuries, philosophers, being the creative bunch that they are, have come up with dozens of what we may call skeptical arguments. Skeptical arguments are simply arguments for skepticism about one or more claims, including claims about the world based on our senses. The term skepticism itself says as much. It comes from the Greek word skepsis, which means doubt. A skeptic, then, is just someone who doubts something. Most of us are skeptics about something. You can be skeptical of small things or big things. Have you ever seen a mirage on a hot highway in the summertime? If you have, and you've sped down the highway chasing such a mirage, hoping to finally reach the elusive water, you have been disappointed. The mirage just keeps receding and you never reach it. At some point, you will have concluded that the water is not really there, and so the next time you see such a mirage, you will be skeptical about it. You will doubt that it's there, admitting at the same time that there's just a chance, just a tiny chance, that there really is water there. And so you drive on with some interest in the outcome, but not much hope. Your skepticism in such cases is nearly always justified. Mirages on hot summer highways are fun, but perhaps not the most important thing about which you could be skeptical. Maybe you've followed climate science for the last few decades. Perhaps you are aware of the large amount of scientific evidence that global temperatures are rising. Perhaps you're also aware of the various predictions, mostly not good, about the future effects of climate change on human beings. Perhaps you know something about the efforts of various governments and non-governmental organizations working to address climate change to mitigate the effects and spare humanity some unnecessary suffering down the road. And perhaps you are skeptical of our collective ability to actually do much to stop or even slow down climate change. That's not an unimportant thing about which to be skeptical. Perhaps, however, you are one of those curious people who is skeptical about science itself, not just parts of science or this or that scientific theory, but about all of science. Now that is a significant level of skepticism. Or maybe you're skeptical about everything. Maybe you doubt that we can have knowledge about anything. Philosophers have a name for this sort of skepticism. They call it radical or global skepticism. Okay, that's two names for the same thing. Skepticism about the mirage is not radical skepticism, of course. Philosophers would call it merely local skepticism. It's skepticism about a particular thing, not everything. So it's not global. The thing is, almost everyone is skeptical about something. Having grown up in Detroit, Michigan, I have been skeptical for decades about the chances that the Detroit Lions will win a Super Bowl in my lifetime. I'm also skeptical that computers, as we know them, will ever suffice for true human-like artificial intelligence. And I'm not alone in my skepticism about either of these two things. But note that there are perfectly reasonable, highly intelligent people, including people whom I admire, who are not at all skeptical about either the Lions winning a Super Bowl or about the imminent realization of full AI in the next few years. My skepticism about these things is not in any way remarkable, but neither is their optimism, really. As I said, almost everyone is skeptical about some things and optimistic about other things. In that sense, there's nothing remarkable about being skeptical. It's actually thought for the most part to be a virtue. And its extreme opposite, credulity or maybe gullibility, is usually thought to be a vice. No, a certain amount of skepticism in both the individual and in society as a whole is healthy. We've been talking about what it means to be skeptical as an individual, but it's also true that societies can be skeptical. What would skepticism in a society look like? Well, it would be institutionalized. The process of peer review of scientific and academic papers is one very good, very important form of institutional social skepticism. Too much skepticism, or the wrong kind of skepticism, or a skepticism about the wrong things, however, is itself a vice for both individuals and societies. Think again about global skepticism. A truly global skeptic would doubt everything and would claim that we have absolutely no knowledge whatsoever. Such a position is inherently contradictory, however, and no reasonable person can hold it without logical inconsistency, since if we can't know anything, then we can't know that we can't know anything, since claiming to know that we can't know anything is itself a claim of knowledge. For this reason, truly radical global skepticism is self-defeating. It has rather oddly been defended in recent decades, especially by some postmodern philosophers, but if you believe logical consistency and logical non-contradiction are touchstones of truth, then it'd be difficult to defend true radical global skepticism as a philosophical position. Now, when thinking philosophically about skepticism, you need to have a mental map of the territory, so to speak. I'd suggest the following. Imagine a map of a new continent in which the various states or lands are inhabited by like-minded people who have sorted themselves out based on the things about which they are skeptical. On one coast of our map is credulous land, the land of the radically credulous. The inhabitants of credulous land are skeptical of nothing. No matter what you tell them, no matter what claim you make, they smile and nod and say, "Yep, that's true. Knew it all along." On the other coast, we have radical land, the land of the radical skeptics. We're globalists, they like to say, meaning that they are global skeptics. So far, so good. But when you look over the vast territory in the middle of the map, you see communities almost numberless in extent, each containing a group of people who are skeptics about the same things. The middle lands are so varied, in fact, that you almost miss the fact that they fall into three important and distinct regions. Let's look at those three regions. First, there are the lands of the skeptics of religious experience. The citizens of this part of the continent doubt any claim that is based on religious or mystical experience, revelation, things like that. They may even go as far as to claim that science and or reason have shown that all religious claims are false, although there are still plenty of religious residents in this part of our continent who only object to religious and mystical experience as sources of knowledge, but still believe in religion within the bounds of reason alone, as they like to say. The number and variety of communities in this land is quite impressive. There are both small and large communities, for example, in which live people who are skeptical of other religions but not their own. Interestingly, the residents of the lands of the skeptics of religious experience can cite more than a handful of skeptical arguments in favor of their views, touting the virtues of their part of the country usually. Religious experience may just be an undesirable byproduct of our highly evolved brains, for example, or perhaps, as Freud argued, religion is a psychological illness, a neurosis. Sometimes some residents will argue that because your religious experience does not comport with their religious scriptures, yours must be false while theirs is true. The residents have many other arguments for their views, and they're usually happy to share them with you if you care to visit. Then there are the lands of the skeptics of the senses. We're all at least part-time residents here. We have all learned that our senses sometimes do deceive us, but the full-time residents, now those are some interesting people. They like to present visitors with arguments that seem to show that we can never trust our senses. You're probably familiar with some of these arguments. You might be a brain in a vat, controlled by evil scientists, or you might be in a simulation created by aliens with highly advanced technology. Or the universe might even be the toy of a malicious, deceiving, all-powerful God. The residents of the lands of the skeptics of the senses have many such arguments against reliance on the senses. Sadly, however, the lands of the sensory skeptics are much less densely inhabited than the lands of the religious skeptics, and while they see a pretty constant flow of visitors, mostly college students, most people who visit, even those with the idea that they may settle down here full-time, generally take a quick look around and then leave, returning for short visits when they think their senses are deceiving them about particular things, but generally trusting what their senses tell them. Finally, we reach the least settled of the skeptical lands, the bleak lands of the skeptics of rational knowledge. These are the people who are skeptical of purely abstract knowledge, things like mathematics or logic. The skeptics of rational knowledge doubt that we know things like 1 + 1 = 2, or that we know that if A is always followed by B and B is always followed by C, then A must always be followed by C. The residents of these lands don't have as many arguments in support of their position as do these skeptics of religious experience or the skeptics of the senses, but the people here generally believe that the quality of their arguments more than makes up for the lack of quantity. Tourism in the land the skeptics of rational knowledge is minimal in spite of their best advertising efforts. Even fewer visit here than visit the lands of the skeptics of the senses, and again, it's mostly college students who have even less reason to distrust mathematics and logic than they do their senses. Now, in future videos, we're going to visit these lands, and we're going to listen to and assess the residents' various skeptical arguments.